This is California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. So glad you're with us today. Our guest will be Mimi Walters. She's a member of the California State Senate. Then we will be joined by a colleague of hers on the Democratic side. His name is Alex Padilla, but we start with Senator Walters. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to speak with you about pensions and pension reform. The governor, late last year, submitted a 12-point plan as it relates to pension reform, and the Republicans submitted the Democratic governor's plan word for word, didn't change a dot, a period, a comma. Talk about triangulation. How'd that happen?
Well, it's amazing. Republicans are agreeing with the Democrat governor.
Right.
We're very pleased to see that the governor is serious about pension reform, and the plan that he put forward is really a great first step in terms of having comprehensive pension reform.
It's interesting. The nonpartisan legislative analyst office said it was a bold starting point, and apparently the Republicans agree. You would think then that if you have the Republicans agreeing that this plan is a good one, the Democratic governor agreeing the plan is a good one, that this should pass.
Well, that's what I agree with you that I thought would happen. But I think the bigger picture is that the majority party in the legislature is not serious about having real true pension reform, because if they were, they would have adopted what the governor had put forward, who is a member of their own party.
Why do you think the majority party, as you say, they're not interested in, quote, true pension reform? Because, you know, we've all spoken with them, and they say we need pension reform. I mean, it's one of those issues that Democrat or Republican, cities, counties, states, I mean, they're being crushed by the weight of pensions.
Well, you have to look at the special interests in Sacramento, and the majority party relies on that special interest. And it's going to take a lot of guts for them to stand up to them in order to get pension reform, because those special interests don't want pension reform.
Let's talk about, as you described, the special interests. I think it's fair to say that most likely we're talking about unions.
Right.
I mean, public sector unions.
Right.
And if you look at the public sector unions, you would think that they could see the same landscape that we are seeing. And again, I'm not trying to be partisan, I'm neutral on this, but I just look at the landscape. You have San Diego overwhelmingly passing pension reform, a moderate to conservative city. You have San Jose, a moderate to liberal city, overwhelmingly passed pension reform. In the last few years, 18 out of 20 cities who have been presented with pension reform, their voters said yes. The 2 times San Francisco, well, okay. So, I mean, you'd think it's a perfect storm, and there'd be a reason to push forward, especially if you're a union executive. I mean, you could have an initiative on the ballot. There'd be worse.
If you look at the analysis that have been done, we have anywhere from $100 billion to $500 billion in unfunded pension liability in the state of California. Now, that's just unfunded pension liability. This is a huge issue that we're facing, and you would think that you would want the unions to come in and say, okay, we understand California is about to go off a cliff. We have to have some sort of pension reform.
And I do want to say, the Little Hoover Commission, which is nonpartisan, has said that California's pensions are dangerously underfunded.
That's correct.
It's not Republican Mimi Walters saying that. This is the Little Hoover Commission. Not that I don't trust you, but we're hearing this from nonpartisan offices.
Well, the fact is that Sacramento legislators in the majority party haven't been willing to move forward on pension reform. Tells you that they're not serious about it. There's a lot of talk about it. So what's happening is you have your local municipalities now are having to take matters into their own hands. And you have, like San Jose, the mayor of San Jose, who is a Democrat, is the one that championed pension reform and put it and helped make sure it got on the ballot. And the voters overwhelmingly supported reform.
And the governor, a Democrat, supports pension reform.
Exactly.
So the issue seemingly has become nonpartisan, bipartisan, but yet we continue to see real struggles on the issue. I want to shift gears slightly and talk about municipalities. I mean, you mentioned San Jose, you mentioned San Diego. We would be remiss if we didn't mention San Bernardino and Stockton. I mean, the Democratic mayor of San Bernardino has said that employee compensation, including pensions, is one of the main reasons why his city had to file for bankruptcy.
Exactly. The local municipalities don't have a choice, and they're not as partisan, by the way, as the legislators in Sacramento are. So what I believe is going to happen is you're going to look at the local municipalities. They're going to say, we're not going to be able to provide services anymore to our residents if we don't do something now. And they're taking matters into their own hands, and they're working at the local level, and it's going to work its way up to the top.
At the same time, while many do believe that pension reform is necessary, it is but one issue in a whole host of issues facing the state.
Right.
And I think the concern of many is that public sector employees and or their unions are being scapegoated. I mean, look, we have people in this room that work for the state, you know, and we honor their service. They may be a member of a public sector union. So how do we create a scenario whereby we still value the hard work of state workers while recognizing that we simply have an issue that needs to be resolved?
Well, we have to look at what are the abuses that are happening in pension reform, in pension as well. You have people that are able to keep their vacation pay until the year before they retire so that they can get a higher payout. You have abuses. I mean, look at the city of Bell, where you had a city manager making hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars who just abused the system.
Bad eggs, no doubt there are bad eggs. But, you know, interestingly, Governor Schwarzenegger was able to get some pension reform. Airtime had been resolved, I believe, but we do have more issues that need to be resolved. I also want to ask you about another corollary as it relates to pension reform, and that deals with the competition between the private sector and the public sector. Look, both sectors offer they're alluring for different reasons. Part of the reason when we go to the public sector as opposed to the private sector is job security. You may make less money, but you have strong benefits, better benefits than you do if you're in the private sector. The problem is if we engage in pension reform that some would say it would be too drastic, too dramatic, too draconian, all of a sudden the public sector starts losing its advantage. And we need public sector workers. I mean, for important things like, you know, hospitals, earthquakes, you know, there is a need for them. So where's the balance?
The environment's changed. Look at our economy. We're facing, you know, the worst depression since the Great Depression back in the 30s, right? So everything is changing, and all of a sudden now you've got what, an 11% unemployment rate in the state of California. You have so many people that are looking for work. And in the private sector, years ago, they changed their pensions. And people in the private sector suddenly realized that they couldn't sustain the systems they were on. So it's about being more competitive. We have government workers now that are making more money than many people in the private sector.
There is no doubt that, and studies say this, that base salaries are starting to come in line, but it's still, I mean, you know, you still would likely make less in the government than you would in the private sector. But I have to ask you, do you believe that we will see some form of pension reform in this legislative year?
I believe we will see a form of pension reform. Will it be comprehensive? No. Will it make major changes to the issues we're facing with pensions? No. I believe that this legislature will do something to say, hey, we took care of a couple of the abuses, and now let's hope this issue goes away.
Is something better than nothing? Or is nothing better because if you do something, it won't address the real fundamental problem?
My concern is if we just do a little something, it won't address the fundamental concerns that we're facing, and the issue may very well go away.
Are you in the room, metaphorically speaking, on the budget, for example? The Republicans, it's public knowledge, we're not in the room. Are Republicans in the room on pension reform discussions?
Not at all.
Really?
Not. I sat on the conference committee, and we had about 5 meetings, and I was being told that we're going to put forward a analysis of what happened at the conference committee hearing, and I never was involved in any of those discussions. And by the way, I haven't even seen anything yet that's come from the conference committee hearings that we had. So for all intents and purposes, the Republicans are left out of the process completely.
Okay, let's shift gears, if we may, and talk about education. My daughters aren't quite in college yet, they're still young, but I do see the weight of textbooks that they and their colleagues can carry around. What's a little baffling about the fact that they have these thick textbooks is they also have their Kindles and their iPads. And I think to myself, why should these children, these students, be spending so much on these thick textbooks when they could just put it on a Kindle? You have those same concerns, I understand.
I absolutely do. In fact, I took a tour of a school in my district, and actually was one of the more underprivileged schools in my district, where they were given a grant, and the kids were using their iPads, and they were using their iPhones, and they were learning off of digital technology. Exactly. And talking to the teachers that were teaching these kids, they were telling me how their scores were improving.
Really?
And how kids today are so technologically more advanced than maybe you and I were when we were in school.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
And the way that kids are learning today is changing.
I just want to know, how do you highlight? I mean, that's my question. How do you highlight if you want to remember something later? But be that as it may.
I'm not sure on that either. But what we decided to do was bring forward legislation that would give schools the opportunity to have their materials in digital format and make it cost effective for them to do it. And so that's the SB 1154.
And the good news is the Republicans are in the room on this issue. One could argue being good news because it's a bipartisan bill.
Exactly.
I know you're working with Senator Lowenthal, Senator Alquist. You know, forgive my ignorance, but it seems like a no-brainer. Where do we stand on this?
The bill has passed out of the Senate with no votes.
Okay.
I think that might be a first for me.
Could be.
And now it is in the Assembly, and I believe we go to Assembly Appropriations.
And so what does the bill say essentially? I mean, in the simplest form, that districts have to provide digital? Explain.
That districts must be offered textbooks in digital format.
I see. So my question is, what do the publishers say?
Well, that's been our challenge. Our challenge has been with the publishers. We've been working very closely with them, but you could imagine there's been some resistance because they print the textbooks. But they also understand we're in the 21st century now, and this is the wave of the future.
I mean, you're a finance individual, gal, if I may say. I mean, I have to think the margins could be quite good. I mean, think about the printing costs for textbooks versus digital delivery.
Right.
Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right, and that's obviously one of the challenges, but we are not in the, trying to promote this legislation to hurt the publishers financially. We are proposing this legislation really so that we can make it easier for the kids to learn, help them learn, and it's really all about the kids and making sure that they have the tools they need.
You're running for re-election in our final moments. I want to get a sense, when you talk to your voters, what are they saying to you? What are their concerns?
Their concerns are, I need a job. I need to be put back to work, because you have so many people in our state who are losing their homes.
It breaks your heart. And I think about your communities, fairly well heeled. I mean, diverse district, but fairly well heeled. It's got to break your heart.
It does. It does. And, I'm trying to do my best to help make sure that we turn this economy around in our state and we get those people back to work.
Okay, Mimi Walters, thank you so much for joining us. She is a member of the California State Senate. When we come back, we'll be speaking with one of her colleagues. His name is Alex Padilla. I'm Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on California Edition. Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Alex Padilla, he is a member of the California State Senate. He is also considering a run for California Secretary of State. So it's apropos that he has offered SB 35, which deals with voter registration. I can remember, sir, back to the early 90s, and the big push, thanks to MTV, was Motor Voter. Why don't you tell us what Motor Voter is, and then let's talk about SB 35.
So Motor Voter and Rock the Vote
and
all that, the fun early 90s
yes.
stuff. First of all, I appreciate the nod,
Please.
But it also comes, I think, at an important time. This is the year 2012, yet another presidential election, and as not just 4 years ago, but 8 years ago and 12 years ago have demonstrated, every vote can make a difference, even in an election like for President of the United States.
No doubt.
And so it's been our country's history to allow every eligible person to register to vote. We want to make it as easy as possible for people who are eligible to register to vote, make sure their names are on the rolls, and encourage them to show up on election day.
So what Motor Voter did is it allowed California citizens to vote when going to the to register when going to the DMV.
So in 1993, when President Clinton was in his first term, there was already success demonstrated in the state of Washington in getting people to register to vote when they were coming in to apply for or renew their driver's license. That's why it's known as Motor Voter. And so at that time, they said, well, it's a great idea. It's working in Washington. Let's broaden this nationally. And so there was this National Voter Registration Act that did two things. It required every state to create this voter registration mechanism through the Department of Motor Vehicles or their version of it. But it also required states to identify at least one additional department or agency to be a quote-unquote voter registration agency. In the state of California, under Governor Pete Wilson's wisdom, that agency became the Board of Equalization.
Do people frequent the Board of Equalization often?
Not very much.
Right.
I mean, it's a very small universe of people that have a personal interface with the Board of Equalization directly or personally. And so here we are almost 20 years later, and it's surprised me that nobody's gone back to this area of the law to see what else can be done, because we've seen success in other states where they've picked either different departments or agencies or multiple departments and agencies and have helped increase their voter registration numbers. California ranks 45th in our voter registration rate.
It's surprising. When you think about California, it seems like it's an activist state.
It's an activist state. We're young, we're energetic, we're innovative, we're creative.
So under your proposed legislation, I presume what you're doing is you're broadening the agencies that would be permitted to provide voter registration information.
Exactly. Knowing that there's literally millions of Californians who are eligible to register to vote and have not registered, it seems we want to increase the avenues for their registration and participation. So the bill would broaden it to not just be the Board of Equalization. Let's build on what's already been done at the high school level, the community college, and university level. But the Department of Veteran Affairs, for example, with thousands upon thousands of young men and women returning from Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, when they come to the state for support, let's make it easy for them to make sure they're registered and can participate in the elections.
Does your bill specify the agencies, or does it give the executive branch authority to specify which agency?
The bill at this point does specify a list of departments and agencies, and so now we're negotiating, working with each one of those departments or agencies to see how easy and hopefully inexpensive it would be to incorporate this function. You know, another one where I think there's a huge potential is the California Benefits Exchange, or the Healthcare Exchange.
Ah, yes, under
With the
Affordable
advent
Care
of
Act.
national health care reform, we're going to have literally millions of Californians coming into some state department or office to fill out the forms. And that's the beauty of all this, whether it's DMV, the Healthcare Exchange, applying for community college or anything else. You're writing down your name, your address, your date of birth, et cetera, and a signature.
It would
all
seem
the same.
to me the easiest way to register to vote is online. I mean, that would seem the easiest, but I can imagine the perils with online registration. Most specifically, how do you sign your
and
document?
That's been a concern for a long time. Last year, we moved forward with legislation that helps accommodate online voter registration, because in other benefits applications, an e-signature is already allowed.
Is that true?
So if the state of California already has your relevant information, name, address, et cetera, and an electronic signature captured somewhere, well, let's let the Secretary of State recognize that as sufficient for voter registration purposes.
And so, do we have that now? Or
That's in the process of being implemented, not just in California, but in a handful of other states.
So aside from your bill, online registration is near in the future.
Absolutely, and again, I think part of the timing of this bill, it's not a coincidence. Presidential year, and we hear story after sad story across the country of other states changing their voter registration and their voting laws to be more restrictive.
And let's talk about that, sir, because it's in the news a lot lately. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I know the governor of Florida has been attacked for purging voter rolls. What do you make of these attempts to make voting arguably more difficult? What's the motivation in your mind?
Personally, I think it's a shame and downright un-American. You know, the tradition of our country, the tradition of our democracy is to be as inclusive as possible. I think there's these false perceptions out there in some limited quarters. Oh, we have to do everything we can to prevent voter fraud. The instances of voter fraud throughout the country are extremely minimal. I mean, study after study shows that it's less than a fraction of 1% where this has been found to be the case.
But let me ask you this, because, for example, if I want to buy something with my credit card, I have to show them my ID, and it proves that it's me. Is there a problem inherent in asking a voter to present an ID on the day that they vote?
Yes, here's the fundamental difference. There's things in this country that are a right, and there's things in this country that are a privilege. Having a credit card is a privilege.
Fair enough.
It's not a right. Being able to get through security at an airport, to get on an airplane is a privilege. It's not a right. Being able to go to the ballot box and cast your vote for city council, for school board, or for president of the United States is a constitutional right.
So what can be done to protect that right?
Well, in those other states with these policies that are being pursued, there's already, and I anticipate more litigation on the constitutionality of those provisions. I bring them up in this conversation only to demonstrate the contrast. My belief, the foundation of this country, the foundation of our democracy is to be as inclusive as possible, to make it as easy as possible to participate legitimately. A bill like this that will make it easier for people who are eligible to register to vote to indeed register and be able to vote seems to me the way we ought to be going.
Here's an interesting challenge, and part of the reason my guess is that California has such a low registration number vis-a-vis the other states is we have a rich immigrant population. And a lot of those new Americans have come from countries where you just don't get involved in government. If you get involved in government, it's only a recipe for disaster. Some of them from Central and South America. I know recently you were elected to be president of the National Association of Latino Elected Officials. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah,
I congratulate you on that.
Much.
And so what can be done aside from barriers or the elimination of barriers to convince new Americans that voting is not done at your peril, but it's part of the process. It's quintessentially American, as you would describe.
Right. I think a couple of things. I think once upon a time, that fear of participating in democracy was a concern, given where people were coming from, whether it's a country in Asia and Latin America, elsewhere in Europe, where there was sort of civil unrest that drove people here. I think that's changed, both because time has passed and the circumstances by which people have left their home countries to come to America has changed. My parents are a perfect example. Really? They came to the United States in the late 60s, pursuing the American dream.
From where?
From Mexico.
Okay.
And so my sister was born here, I was born here, my brother was born here, we were raised here, and it wasn't until the late 1990s, post Proposition 187 here in California, that my parents finally felt the motivation to become citizens, not just for the sake of becoming a citizen, but to register to vote and actually to vote in
So they didn't vote in your first election for City Council of Los Angeles?
No, just my mother was sworn in as a citizen with less than a week after my first election to the City Council. She was trying to make that deadline.
But that's stunning to think about in so many ways. And so you represent an area that is rich in diversity. Right. Talk to me about, because look, Latino voting patterns, and I'll talk about Latinos just because you represent that area. Latinos are voting in greater numbers than they had in prior elections, but they still vote disproportionately less to their numbers.
Right, and it's a combination. It's not sort of a broad generalization. If you look at the immigrant community, whether it's Latinos or anybody else, when immigrants register to vote, their voting rates are much higher than the average American, voting participation.
Oh, so if they do register, they're excited to vote.
Absolutely, because they feel that that's their purpose, that's their mission, that's why they're becoming citizens or registering to vote, because they want to have their say in the outcome of our election. So our challenge is, how do we get the people who aren't becoming citizens to become citizens if they're eligible, or people who haven't registered to register because you know the participation will be there. And one of the ways, this is not on the registration side, but on the voting side, we see higher and higher rates of voting by mail. So it's no longer a fear equation, it's maybe more a convenience equation.
Let's talk about VBM. I have voted in every single election, I believe. I don't think I've missed an election, and I think I have voted in a polling place twice. Every single election I have voted by mail. And I vote very early because if I don't vote, I forget. That, in my opinion, has really changed the face of elections. I mean, they need, the politicians need to get to me pretty darn early because I'm voting a month before everyone else. Good for democracy?
Well, again, I think it's not an either or. It's not vote at the polls or vote by mail. I don't think it's registering online or walking into an office. I think it's maximizing the opportunities for people to participate, whether it's to register initially or to actually cast their ballot. So vote by mail, if that's what works for you, great, we got to accommodate that. If it's walking into a polling place, great, we still need to be able to accommodate that.
What's interesting is recently, it feels like maybe the last 10 years, becoming a permanent vote by mail voter became extremely easy. It used to be that you had to show some form of disability. Now anyone can do it.
Exactly.
What's your sense of that? Is that a net plus for democracy?
I think it's a net plus if we can look back and say more and more people and more percentages of voters were participating in elections because we broadened the ability or the opportunities to participate. Look, from a government standpoint, frankly, it is getting a little bit more expensive because you have to assume people are going to vote by mail, but you still have to keep the polling places open on election day.
What about same-day voting registration? I believe Assemblyman Mike Fuhr has a bill pending on that issue.
Right.
What do you think about same-day voter reg?
Right. I think it's absolutely a good idea as long as we have the safety mechanisms involved to sort of verify the eligibility of that new registrant before the ballot's cast. You know, the same concern that you said earlier about either online registration or anything else. Is there an opportunity for fraud or for illegal ballots to be cast? You know, so as long as there's a safety mechanism to verify that, then I think anything that can help more and more people participate in each and every election, it's consistent with our democracy and our democratic principles.
So why, you're convincing me, why are bills like this, like motor voter, so difficult to get through the system?
Well, I don't think our bill is going to have too much problems in getting through the legislature. Knock on wood, don't take anything for granted. But I think where the contrast is, we have policy proposals in the state of California to help enfranchise people, get more people to participate, in contrast to other states where they're looking at restricting people and eliminating opportunities to participate. I think over time, we will prevail not just in California, but be that model, that beacon of hope for other states to follow.
His name is Alex Padilla. He is a member of the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank the Senator for joining us, and we thank you for watching California Edition.